August 1, 1943, 178 American bombers took off from the desert in Libya heading north. Their target was Ploesti Romania, the oil refineries that fed 1/3 of the entire Nazi war machine. The Germans were waiting for them. What followed has been called the longest, bloodiest, most heroic bombing mission in the history of aerial warfare. 57 aircraft shot down, 310 men killed, 5 medals of honor awarded in a single afternoon, more than for any other single military action in American history. The aircraft that flew that mission was not the famous B-17 Flying Fortress. It was an aircraft its own crews called the Flying Coffin. 18,482 were built, more than any American military aircraft in history, before or since, and history forgot it almost completely. This is the story of the Consolidated B-24 Liberator, the most produced American war machine ever built. The aircraft that closed the Atlantic Gap flew missions no other bomber could reach and carried 5 men to the Medal of Honor over the burning skies of Romania. And the self-taught outsider, the stubborn engineer, the 42,000 factory workers, and 15,000 women who had never seen a factory floor, who built every single one of them. In the summer of 1937, a freelance aeronautical engineer named David R. Davis knocked on the door of Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego with a wing design nobody believed would work. Davis was self-taught. He had no university degree in aerodynamics. He had spent years developing what he called the fluid foil, a wing profile he had designed in reverse, starting from a basic low-drag teardrop shape and modifying it to produce lift. Every manufacturer he approached turned him away. The established aeronautical community dismissed him. Consolidated's president Reuben Fleet was introduced to Davis by Walter Brookins, the first licensed pilot in America. Fleet was skeptical, so was Consolidated's chief engineer Isaac McLadden. They turned Davis away. Then Ladden had a change of heart. He convinced Fleet to pay for wind tunnel tests at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, in Pasadena. They sent a Davis wing model alongside their own best in-house design and let Caltech judge them blind. The initial results confused the Caltech scientists. The instruments could not detect what Davis was claiming. Davis argued the instruments were not sensitive enough. Caltech recalibrated, ran the test again, then a third time. When they delivered their final report, the results were so good they suggested it might be a wind tunnel fluke. The Davis wing appeared to deliver everything Davis had claimed. A drag coefficient lower than any contemporary design, lift at angles of attack that conventional wings could not match. Fleet made the decision they would use it. What Davis had stumbled upon, without any formal aerodynamic theory to explain it, was the principle of laminar flow. His wing profile delayed the transition from smooth to turbulent airflow across the wing surface. The result was dramatically reduced drag. Years later, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics would develop its own laminar flow wing for the P-51 Mustang, using the same principle with the full weight of institutional science behind it. David Davis had gotten there first using parametric equations he developed himself. Davis received his royalties, his name appeared on a patent, and then history forgot him almost entirely. He deserves better than that. Meanwhile, Isaac McLadden, the chief engineer who changed his mind and convinced Fleet to run those wind tunnel tests, was already working on something bigger. In 1938, the United States Army Air Corps approached Consolidated and asked them to build the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress under license. Ladden visited Boeing's factory in Seattle, studied the B-17 in detail, and came back with an answer nobody expected. He told his executives he could build something better. 9 months later, 9 months from contract to first flight, the XB-24 prototype took to the air on December 29, 1939. Ladden had given it the Davis wing. He designed it with roll-up bomb bay doors that retracted into the fuselage rather than swinging open into the airstream, reducing aerodynamic drag while bombing in a way no bomber had ever done before. It was the first American heavy bomber ever built with tricycle landing gear, and it had 300 miles more range than the B-17. On paper, it was the superior aircraft in almost every measurable category. The Davis wing gave the B-24 its extraordinary range, but that same wing carried a fatal vulnerability. The high aspect ratio design that made it so efficient also made it thin relative to its span. It was not built to absorb battle damage the way the B-17's shorter, thicker wing could. A few well-placed cannon rounds or a flak burst near the wing root could cause catastrophic structural failure. B-17s came home with wings that looked like they had been put through a metal grinder. B-24s sometimes did not come home at all. The crews knew it. They named it accordingly: the Flying Coffin, the Flying Boxcar, names that told you exactly what the men inside it thought of their chances. But it was there, 18,000 times over, and it was needed. In 1940, Henry Ford looked at the B-24 blueprints and made a claim that the entire American press corps laughed at. He said he could apply automobile assembly line principles to bomber production and build them at a rate that would be impossible for any traditional aircraft manufacturer. The journalists were so skeptical they named the factory before it produced a single aircraft. They called it Will It Run. Ford built the Willow Run plant from scratch near Ypsilanti, Michigan, 3.5 million square feet under one roof, the largest factory under a single roof in the world when it was completed. The assembly line ran in an L shape because the county line between Washtenaw and Wayne County ran through the property. Ford did not want to build worker housing in Wayne County for tax reasons, so he bent the assembly line around a tax bill. The bombers turned left. The early production numbers were dismal. The press was merciless. Will It Run became a national joke. Ford did not stop. He built worker housing, an entire community called Willow Village, because there was nowhere near the factory for 42,000 workers to live. He ran fleets of buses from Detroit and surrounding towns. He built a hospital on site. He recruited workers from across the country. 200,000 people from the American South alone moved to Michigan for factory jobs. Some arrived having never owned a pair of shoes. The workforce at Willow Run became something America had never seen before. African Americans, white workers, older men, younger men unable to serve militarily. People of small stature assigned to crawl inside the bomber's wings to hold parts in place during assembly. And women. At peak production, 15,000 women worked at Willow Run, 35% of the total workforce. Each completed B-24 contained more than 300,000 rivets in more than 500 different sizes. The women who drove those rivets did it with the same precision and the same pay, 85 cents an hour, as the men beside them. One of those women was Rose Monroe, a widow from Pulaski County, Kentucky, who had moved to Michigan with her 2 young children after her husband was killed in a car accident. She worked the Willow Run assembly line building B-24 Liberators. An actor named Walter Pidgeon came to Willow Run to shoot a war bond promotional film and noticed her working. He asked her to appear in it. She became the living face of Rosie the Riveter, the symbol of every woman who had walked into an American factory and refused to leave until the war was won. Ford proved the press wrong. By mid-1944, Willow Run was producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. The factory that journalists called Will It Run was building half of all B-24s produced that year. Ford alone built 8,645 Liberators. Together with Consolidated in San Diego and Fort Worth, Douglas in Tulsa, and North American in Dallas, 5 factories building the same aircraft simultaneously. Combined peak output reached over 600 aircraft per month. Production was so fast and so relentless it eventually exceeded the military's ability to absorb new aircraft. Completed B-24s sat in storage waiting for crews to fly them. Now look at where those aircraft went and what they did. In Europe, the B-24 flew alongside the B-17, hitting the same targets: oil refineries, ball-bearing factories, aircraft production plants, railway yards. It suffered proportionally similar losses, but it never captured the same mythology as the B-17 because it was less forgiving of damage and its crews knew it. The most famous B-24 mission of the entire war was also its most costly. Operation Tidal Wave, August 1, 1943. 178 B-24 Liberators took off from bases in Benghazi, Libya, on a 2,400-mile round trip to attack the Ploesti oil refineries in Romania. Ploesti produced approximately 30% of all Axis oil. Destroying it would cripple the Nazi war machine. The mission was planned as a low-level surprise attack, flying below radar, below the flak guns, below the fighter cover. The bombers would drop their bombs from as low as 200 feet and use delayed fuses to allow the aircraft to clear the area before detonation. It went wrong from the beginning. One aircraft crashed on takeoff. A second ditched into the Mediterranean. Cloud cover over Greece separated the formations. A navigation error sent the lead group toward Bucharest instead of Ploesti. By the time the error was corrected and the groups turned north toward the target, the element of surprise was gone. The Germans had intercepted the radio transmissions. Colonel Alfred Gerstenberg, the Luftwaffe commander in the region, had been waiting for them. Anti-aircraft guns ringed the entire refinery complex. Barrage balloons with steel cables that could rip the wings off a bomber hung over the most important installations. Fighter squadrons from Germany, Romania, and Bulgaria were already airborne. The American formations arrived over Ploesti, not together as planned but in fragments, from different directions at different times. Some refineries were hit by too many aircraft, others were barely touched. The formations that arrived later flew into targets, already burning from the bombs of the aircraft ahead of them. What followed has been called the longest, bloodiest, most heroic bombing mission in the history of aerial warfare. 57 B-24s were shot down. Another 55 were so heavily damaged they never flew again. 310 airmen were killed. Over 100 were captured. In the chaos over Ploesti that day, 5 men performed acts of courage so extraordinary that they were each awarded the Medal of Honor. 3 of the 5 received it posthumously. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker and his co-pilot Major John Gerstad were leading the 93rd Bomb Group when their aircraft took a direct hit. The plane was on fire. They could have turned away. Instead, they held their position at the head of the formation, leading their group through the target, maintaining course until the bombs were away. Only then did Baker pull the aircraft up to altitude to give his crew a chance to bail out. Nobody survived. Both men received the Medal of Honor posthumously. Colonel Leon Johnson of the 44th Bomb Group flew his aircraft through the burning wreckage of already destroyed refineries, through smoke so thick his pilots could barely see, and completed his bomb run with precision. He survived. He received the Medal of Honor. Colonel John Killer Kane of the 98th Bomb Group led his formation through the target under conditions his own after-action report described as beyond anything he had prepared for. His aircraft was so badly damaged and so short of fuel after the mission that he crash-landed in Cyprus rather than attempting to reach Libya. He survived. He received the Medal of Honor. He never held a combat command again. Second Lieutenant Lloyd Herbert Hughes of the 389th Bomb Group had his aircraft hit multiple times in the fuel tanks on the approach to the target. Fuel was streaming from the wing. He was flying into a field of burning refineries. He knew what would happen. He flew his bomb run anyway. His aircraft caught fire on the way out. Hughes attempted a crash landing. He and 5 of his crew were killed. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously. 5 Medals of Honor for a single mission. It is the most ever awarded for a single air action in the history of the United States military. The oil refineries at Ploesti were back at partial production within weeks. But in the Pacific, the B-24 was a different aircraft entirely. Its range made it irreplaceable in a theater where the distances between targets measured in thousands of miles of open ocean. The 5th, 7th, 10th and 14th Air Forces flew B-24s across the Pacific, India and China. They flew missions the B-17 could not reach, and in the Atlantic they closed the gap that was killing the Allied war effort. The Mid-Atlantic Gap, a stretch of open ocean roughly 600 miles wide where no land-based aircraft could provide air cover. German submarines had operated there freely since the beginning of the war, sinking Allied merchant ships faster than America, and Britain could replace them. In 1942 alone, German submarines sank over 1,000 Allied ships. The supply chain feeding Britain was in genuine danger of collapse. The B-24's range closed that gap. Long-range maritime patrol B-24s began flying coverage over the mid-Atlantic in 1943. Submarines that had operated with impunity for 3 years suddenly found aircraft overhead. The sinking rate dropped dramatically. The Battle of the Atlantic turned. The supply line held. That contribution, invisible and unglamorous, flown over empty ocean with no targets to photograph and no formations to remember, may have been the most strategically important thing the B-24 did in the entire war. By the time the last B-24 rolled off the production line in 1945, 18,482 had been built across 5 factories, the most produced American military aircraft in history, a record that stands to this day, and history barely remembers it. The reason is simple and slightly unfair. The B-17 looked better. It had a more elegant silhouette. It had a name, Flying Fortress, that captured the imagination of the American public. War correspondents who flew combat missions chose the B-17. The press loved it. The photographs of B-17s limping home with massive battle damage told a story of heroic survival that the public responded to. The B-24's slab-sided boxy fuselage earned it names like Flying Boxcar and Flying Coffin. It was harder to fly. It was less forgiving of damage. Its Davis wing, the brilliant outsider invention of a self-taught engineer who knocked on a door that had already been closed to him, gave it unmatched range and ultimately cost some of its crews their lives when combat damaged it. 18,482 of them, built by 5 factories, by 42,000 workers, including 15,000 women who had never worked in manufacturing before the war, by a self-taught wing designer named Davis, who received his royalties and was then forgotten, by an engineer named Ladden, who changed his mind one afternoon and convinced his boss to run a wind tunnel test one more time, by Roswell Monroe from Pulaski County, Kentucky, who drove 300,000 rivets into a 66-foot bomber and became the face of every woman who walked into an American factory and kept walking until the war was over. The aircraft that history called the Flying Coffin outlasted every aircraft that flew alongside it. It served on every continent. It closed the Atlantic Gap. It flew the longest bombing missions of the entire war. It produced 5 Medal of Honor recipients in a single afternoon over Romania, and then it was forgotten. One veteran who flew 30 missions in a B-24 over Europe was asked after the war whether he would have preferred to fly the B-17. He said, "The B-17 was a better aircraft. But the B-24 was there when we needed it, 18,000 times over. That is not a war story. That is an engineering story, and it is exactly the kind of story this channel was built to tell. If this is the kind of history that stops you in your tracks, the machines, the factories, the people, and the mathematics behind how the war was actually won, subscribe to the channel. Every week we go deeper.